At some point on this path, something subtle can happen. The language becomes more precise, practices feel more familiar, there's less confusion than before. From the outside, things may look settled, life appears more aligned, reactions seem calmer, words come more easily. And yet, something doesn't fully relax. There is a sense of holding it together, of staying consistent with what is already understood, of not wanting to lose a certain clarity that once felt like progress. This doesn't happen on purpose, not as a strategy you choose, but as something that slowly formed along the way. This is not a failure on the path, it's one of its more intimate turns. See, the ego doesn't disappear just because we speak the language of awareness. It adjusts. It learns new language, new explanations, new ways to stay in control without sounding defensive or reactive. This isn't a problem, and it isn't a mistake. These patterns once helped create stability. They helped orientation. They helped things feel manageable. And at some point they become visible, not as theories, but as familiar inner positions that repeat themselves in daily life, like masks the ego wears. They are not fixed identities, they don't define a person. This doesn't happen on purpose, no one decides to put on a mask. It forms gradually as understanding deepens and the ego learns how to live inside that understanding. They can appear at different moments, in different phases, sometimes replacing one another. They are simply ways the ego tries to remain intact, even within awakening, especially within awakening. What follows are 9 such masks. Number 1. The escaping mask. This mask appears when spiritual understanding is used to move away from what feels uncomfortable. A difficult emotion comes up, and attention immediately shifts to meaning, acceptance, or perspective. Instead of staying with anger, there is a reminder that everything happens for a reason. Instead of feeling grief, there is an explanation about impermanence. Instead of facing conflict, there is talk about energy. From the outside, it sounds calm, balanced, spiritual, but the original feeling never really gets space. There is often fear underneath, fear of discomfort, fear of emotional intensity, fear of what might happen if things are felt directly. But healing doesn't always feel peaceful. Growth doesn't always feel light. Spirituality isn't meant to lift experience away from life. It's meant to meet life as it is. When understanding consistently replaces feeling, the ego may be using spirituality as a way to stay untouched. Second, the Martyr Mask. This mask forms around giving time, giving energy, giving attention, often more than feels sustainable. On the surface, it looks generous, responsible, caring, but inside there can be exhaustion and unspoken expectations, a hope that others will notice, a hope that the effort will be recognized, a quiet sense of being owed something in return. And when that doesn't happen, resentment appears. Thoughts may appear like, I do so much for everyone, and no one ever really shows up for me. Suffering becomes part of identity, the one who carries everything, the one who always sacrifices. But true care doesn't require self-erasure, and it doesn't depend on being appreciated. When giving consistently hurts, it may be worth noticing what the ego is trying to secure through sacrifice. 3. The Enlightened Mask. This mask appears when spiritual understanding becomes a way to feel above others. The language is familiar, concepts are clear, There is confidence in how things are explained. Other people's reactions are seen as unconscious. Triggers are spoken about from a distance. There is an unspoken sense of having moved past certain human struggles. The tone stays calm, but the energy carries separation. True awakening tends to soften perception, not elevate it. When awareness is used to judge, correct, or dismiss, the ego hasn't disappeared, it has simply found a more refined position. Awakening isn't something that needs to be demonstrated. It doesn't need comparison. 4. The intellectual mask. This mask relies on understanding everything instead of living it. Emotions are analyzed, experiences are explained, pain is broken down into concepts. There may be deep knowledge of psychology, trauma, or spirituality, clear language, strong frameworks, but when asked what is actually being felt, the answer stays abstract. Thinking feels safer than feeling. Explaining feels safer than staying present. A pattern may form like, if it can be understood, it doesn't have to be felt. The ego remains protected in this position, contained, articulate, in control. But real change is not always logical. It doesn't always make sense. When insight consistently replaces contact, intelligence may be functioning as armor. 5. The lone wolf mask. This mask centers around self-reliance, handling everything alone, not asking for help, not expecting support. Thoughts may appear like, there is no one who can really understand. It's easier to deal with this by myself. It can look strong, independent, mature, but often isolation becomes a point of pride. Struggle feels personal, unique, untouchable. The ego turns loneliness into identity, the one who carries their burden alone. But healing doesn't require isolation. Strength isn't measured by how little support is needed. Sometimes allowing others in is the real risk. 6. The competitive mask. This mask is built on comparison, constantly measuring, ahead or behind, doing better or worse. Sometimes it shows up as pride, sometimes as self-doubt. Either way, value becomes relative. One's sense of worth quietly depends on where others seem to stand. But comparison never settles. The criteria keep shifting. There is no stable ground here. Peace begins when the need to rank dissolves, when the path is allowed to be individual without reference points. 7. The victim mask. This mask forms when pain becomes the central story. What happened defines who someone is now. Past wounds shape every present moment. The pain itself is real, what happened matters, but the ego can cling to suffering as identity. Thoughts may appear like, I can't change because of this, I can't move forward because this is who I am now. Healing feels threatening because it means letting go of a familiar narrative. The ego doesn't always want freedom. Freedom removes structure. When suffering becomes the center, life quietly narrows around it. 8. The performer mask. This mask is carefully maintained. A well-shaped image, a consistent presentation, a version of self that receives approval. In public, things look confident and composed. There is validation, attention, but privately there may be exhaustion, emptiness, a fear of being unseen without the role. The ego creates this mask to stay safe, to stay valued, but the cost is distance from what feels real. Nothing needs to be performed here. There is no audience to impress. 9. The ego-free mask. This is the final disguise, the belief that the ego is gone, fully transcended, no longer operating. At this point, nothing is questioned. Any reflection is dismissed as unconsciousness in others. The ego becomes invisible by declaring victory. This mask is dangerous because growth stops here. Awakening isn't the absence of ego. The ego doesn't disappear in the sense of stopping to exist. As long as there is a body, a life in form, the ego remains part of how experience organizes itself in the material world. The shift happens elsewhere. It's not about destroying the ego, but about whether it is running the system, whether it is the one steering everything through control, planning, comparison, and constant striving, or whether it is functioning in service of awareness. What is often called ego death is not the ego vanishing. It is the ego losing its central authority, losing the position at the will. And because the ego doesn't want to give up that role, it tries to preserve it through familiar strategies, through refined identities, through spiritual language, through masks. This is not something to fight and not something to fix. It's a natural response. Awakening doesn't ask for suppression. It asks for noticing, again and again, like hygiene. Not a one-time achievement, but a continuous practice. Awareness is what keeps things clean, not perfection. And nothing here is wrong. These masks aren't obstacles. They are signals, ways something inside learned to stay intact. Each time a mask is seen, the ego quietly returns to its proper place, not eliminated, but no longer in charge. And that noticing again and again is what keeps awareness alive.